Hey everyone, I am here with Chris Methner today, and we're going to be going over the exotic industries, fisheries, genetics, and we're even going to talk about some of the stuff that was passed for Texas regulations for the whitetail industry. As you can tell, we've taken kind of a hiatus on some of these podcasts, but we've really been investing into Droptine Studios, and we're super excited to be able to show you what we've been working up on. So this 2025 is Droptine Studios 10 year, and we're super excited to be able to promote a lot of stuff that I think you guys are going to watch. So let's talk about it. All right. Well, Chris, thank you for being here. Yeah, I know it's a little bit of a trek for you, but we're really glad to have you here today.
I'm excited. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So I guess on today, we'll go over some specific topics, but really listening to your other podcasts you've done, I think what I would like to kind of go over is more the history of Chris, more of the history of Blessed Bayou, and just kind of talking about what made you get into whitetails, exotics, fishing, and what kind of sparked your love for big mouth bass.
Wildlife, yeah. I grew up in southeast Texas, about 30 miles east of Houston, right along the Old Lost River, which is a tributary off the Trinity River. And it's a giant ecosystem that is full of life. It's a wetlands and marsh, but there's several stages. You have the Gulf, you have the Bay, then you have a large wetland system, and then you immediately get into hardwood bottoms and then piney woods. And it's all within, a 15-mile stretch. And so where I lived, you could hit all ecosystems in a boat in a little flat bottom. And so where I actually started in a little blue canoe. So that was my backyard. And I had my dad would take me duck hunting and fishing in a blue canoe when I was little, and I just fell in love with it. And I spent a tremendous amount of time when I was growing up in that marsh, and we trot lined and trapped and fished and duck hunted and, did everything through there. And it just grew my love for the outdoors. And
really?
So when I went to college, I left that area, obviously, and I went to play college football for a very short stint.
Yeah.
And I got out of that and started pursuing education as a wildlife and fisheries biologist. And so I ended up at A&M, Texas A&M University. And at A&M, I was studying wildlife and fisheries and took an internship at Sawdust Ranch, which is now Triple J.
Yeah.
And got with those guys and kind of got into the wildlife ranching industry through that avenue. And from there, it just grew, and I went, after I graduated, those guys that worked there kind of helped me get a job right across the street managing a little ranch. And I started there and managed it, and we did commercial hunting, and we had a 60-something acre lake that we managed the fishery on and had a small cattle operation. And from there, I went to Blue Creek down in El Campo. It was, a giant waterfowl operation and an enormous breeding operation.
Right.
And genetics has always been kind of my passion, and so on fish and deer. And so, I worked with those guys for a while, and primarily on the whitetail end, on the managing the ranch whitetail and managing the pens and the breeding operation. And then I did a bunch of work with those guys in the waterfowl end too.
Really?
And so when I left there, I broke out on my own and started Blessed Bayou Wildlife and Fisheries, and so we've been rolling ever since. We tried to. The goal is to be one of the best in the nation at fisheries management, freshwater fisheries management, and wildlife management. And so that's been our goal ever since. We've been growing slowly but surely, but trying to grow with integrity and, and passion and being really good at what we do.
Right.
And so, and with all of that, our primary focus has always been genetics. And so we, in the wildlife ranching end and whitetail management end, that's where we really excel is understanding what genetics that our customers need.
Right.
in the same way on largemouth bass and fisheries too. We really concentrate on genetics, especially on trophy management scenarios where we're really trying to push the parameters and grow state record bass or huge, gigantic bass, consistently.
Right.
And so now we breed largemouth bass, and of course worked in the whitetail breeding industry for a long time and Axis as well. We started Axis breeding program focusing on genetics and traits and the what we believe to be the most desirable traits and truly the passion behind that is to truly offer properties of genetic improvement all the way through, not just antler traits, but as well hardiness, survivability, disease resistance.
Right.
Which, we could get into, 3 days worth of CWD resistance on whitetail deer, but it's not only CWD, it's EHD and other diseases that we breed for, to where we're trying to really produce an animal that improves a property for generations.
Right.
And, when you start studying whitetail genetics, what you'll learn and doing all these auctions all over the nation, you have to study, a tremendous amount. It's forced me to study a tremendous amount. And, I figured out quite a while back that most most lines of whitetail deer, like your Texas base lines, they come down to just a handful of does. It's usually 2 to 4 does in every line. And so 90-something% of their breeder buck production or best buck production usually comes down to just, 2 to 4 does and their daughters, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters.
Right.
And there's a reason for that genetically. It's mitochondrial DNA is the way it was explained to me. And it's incredibly important whenever you're using genetics to improve properties. And so having the ability to focus on these maternal lines that increase the odds of great production tremendously, and introduce them into properties, it's by far the most effective management tool for landowners, in my opinion. There's nothing to compare to it.
And that's what I've always had a problem with. I had with my handful of ranch owners that we sold to, but there's no, what I always said, there's no sex appeal to a doe, right? And so you're at the mercy of, do you trust your consultant? Do you trust the guy you're buying from? Because, and I won't get into that side of it, but there's some unfortunate people out there that sell barren does or whatever else. But that is, you're 100% correct. The genetics on those does put out onto a ranch are going to be what makes or breaks a property, because you won't know if you made a good choice or not for 5-7 years down the road.
Yep.
And at that point, it's not too late, but you're behind the 8 ball if you don't have that trust in those genetics. Yeah,
and it takes years to try to build that without knowing that knowledge. If you're working, if we had a project, a landowner came to us and said, "Hey, I've got a low fence property and I want to manage this native herd." And, the first thing I would do is, if we're doing DMPs, is probably run DNA.
Right.
And start tracking which females produce the best, because that mitochondrial DNA, that maternal line, it is plain as day if you study it. You can look at Robert Williams' line, which is my favorite Texas line.
Right.
It literally, there's 4 females that the majority of that production comes out of. And same with Lone Hollow line, which used to be Woodard's, and before that was Hal Burdall's.
Right.
There's not very many. There's about 4 really, really powerful maternal lines. And like I said, if you can focus on those and implant those into properties, the genetic impact is unbelievable. You've jumped leap years. It's unbelievable.
So what I know with whitetail, we're able to track that now. How far do you think we are on Axis from being able to know that?
Yeah, it's a long ways. Yeah. Because they drop singles. And the majority of the Axis breeders, including myself, we're just starting. And so that's what, that's what I'll be trying to figure out. Right. I think that's the most important piece. But right now you have what you believe are some really good lines of Axis deer, but you really don't know. You could have the next super doe in your pens or seller. You don't really know. And we'll stack genetics on top of it,
Yeah, because is there anywhere that, I know I went with EWA to California to Cal Davis to be able to go see the facilities where they run the DNA and everything for their registry. Is there is that where y'all are submitting your Axis DNA?
Absolutely.
And then
through UWA.
Are you able to see, or like, do you get a breakdown besides pedigree of like any genetic traits that you're looking for yet?
No.
Okay.
No, there's to my knowledge, no identifying genetic markers for traits, even in whitetail.
Right.
Other than what Seabury did for CWD.
Right.
But what we'll do is we've picked what traits we want to breed for, and we'll start breeding for those. And then, of course, in the Axis world, the best Axis bucks are probably still in the pasture. It's that early in the industry. And so you don't have a perfect buck out there really, and so you're trying to take a 38, 40 inch animal and put caudals, breeding something with caudal, trying to mix these traits and then try to produce them consistently. So.
Yeah, so I think it's a really fun, interesting game, especially when you don't know yet. It's because it's like, I mean, if you had, whoever's mom right now and you just didn't know it and you sold her. But I mean, you hear that all the time. I think it was, who was it? Like, I think Grant told me at one point years ago is like they didn't know who Champion's mom was before Champion, or someone did that. I hear about it all the time, and they like used her as a donor. And it was like, oh no, we're years behind on her because we didn't know. Yeah. And then she had offspring come up. So
as a reset. Yeah, that's right.
And so, it'd be interesting to see how far this Axis goes. And if there are, I know that they were at one point trying to be able to track I don't recall the word, but being able to breed for traits on paper and being able to see, this trait specifically we have 25 different ones that have 10 plus inch caudals. Here's the DNA for it. And I think that'd be really cool to be able to do if they could do that one day.
Common markers.
Right.
Yeah. That would be phenomenal.
Yeah. It would boost it up. I mean, it would promote it 10, 15 years ahead of the game if they're able to get that going.
That's right.
So, what would you say came first? I know where you grew up, it was probably hand in hand. Like you said, you could get everywhere in a little blue canoe all in one place, but do you think you grew up liking hunting or fishing more to be able to get you where you're at today?
I don't know. I liked them pretty close, pretty evenly. Back then, where I grew up, we didn't have much whitetail hunting.
Right.
So we were duck hunters and waterfowl hunters, and so I love that. I still love that. I don't do much of it anymore, but I really enjoyed both, and I probably fisheries fishing a little more. I still probably have a little more of a passion for fishing now. Fisheries management versus wildlife management. Fisheries management is incredibly challenging because everything's underwater.
Right.
While whitetail deer always has oxygen available to him. Well, some fish, when you start working with water, that's not always the case. You can deplete oxygen, you can have water quality issues, and everything. You can't see everything.
Right.
And so it's forever challenging. I mean, every year you get things thrown at you like, what happened? And that makes it fun to me, right? Like you think you know what you're doing, and then Mother Nature teaches you, no.
She's in control.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but as you become more knowledgeable in those fields and really try to understand how to create a healthy fishery or a healthy ecosystem, it's rewarding, especially, you start producing really good fish and making clients happy and just really try to be the best you can possibly be at what you do.
Right. Yeah, I think it's like I went hunting with Justin Cannon, and I'll tie this into asking you similar, but the place we were hunting at, he was like, man, this place they just put up the high fence. They shot everything out, and everything out here I brought them, maybe it was like 6 or 7 red does and a buck. And we saw 20 bucks running around, does everywhere, fawns on the ground. Yeah. And we're sitting in the blind, and I'm supposed to be hunting. And I was like, man, is this rewarding? He's like, we haven't shot anything yet. What are you talking about? And I was like, no, like all this is you. Yeah. And so I guess on that note is what's your favorite project that like you reflect on over the years that's like, man, this is what like I find pride in, like your pride and joy. Do you have a project like that? Yeah.
Well, so there's several, with the whitetail end. For me, I can see, how people dislike or don't agree with the breeding at certain stances until I really got involved into it. But once you see the positives out of it and how effective the management tool is, to me, that's great. But, when you introduce genetics to a property, you have tag deer at the beginning, but 10 years down the road, those animals for generations were born on that ranch.
Right.
What you did, you have these maternal lines we talked about and paternal lines that are just phenomenal. And it's improved those herds for generations. And to me, that's every project I've done like that. It's been phenomenal. Like there's one in Winnie, Texas. There's probably not been a deer harvested over 140 inches in the last 20 years. Well, there's a 1,000-acre piece of property over there that, we're producing 180 to 220 inch beautiful, typical deer consistently.
Right.
And it's been doing that for quite a few years now. And, it's everything's ranch more now. It's a really, to me, that's rewarding. And it as well, I think you have to understand that, there's fiduciary responsibilities to wildlife ranch management, right? Some people are wealthy enough, it's just a hobby to them, but for it to really thrive, it has to produce some income, right? And so, or value and equity. And that's one thing that, a whitetail deer is one of the most valuable resources in the state of Texas. And the increase in value to properties it brings is tremendous. Right. It's absolutely tremendous. And so that's something else I think is really, really important. I think, if you lose that aspect, you lose a tremendous amount of acres dedicated to wildlife management. Because your big boys, your billionaires and your several hundred millionaires, they can afford to go get, a big ranch and just do it as their project or what they like. But your guys that are not up to that class that have to make it produce income, you would lose all those properties. And I don't think you would have, that's where the breeding end is so important, in my opinion, because if I can't supply my customers with improved genetics, I think there would be a high percentage of them that would not invest in a piece of property, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars improving the habitat, which improves the habitat for multiple species, not just whitetail deer. Right. And time and effort and money and have a genetic potential of producing a 130, 140 inch deer. Right. I just don't think they would invest in that property that way. And it wouldn't bring the value up in that property a tremendous amount, right? And so with being able to provide genetics, that's all possible. And I think if you take that out of the equation, you're going to see much less properties dedicated to wildlife management. I
Absolutely.
Really do.
Yeah, because I think as many people naysay on it affects, like there's a reason that the hunting industry or the whitetail hunting industries of, I think the last I saw is 9.8 billion annually. Mm-hmm. Well, you take away the people who are investing in it, like you said, whether it's a high fence or whatever else, or the breeding side of it, like I'd be curious to know the statistic on that ties back to us, the people in this industry, because without that, that number would probably dwindle quickly. Yeah. Because everyone else is just paying for a tag for the year and maybe a couple $100 in feed, maybe a couple $1,000 in farming, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt it has an enormous, and it's rural Texas, right? It's preserving the Texas ranching lifestyle, in my opinion. Yeah. So anything that it improves wildlife ranching, I'm for, I think that's incredibly important. But like EWA's slogan,
conservation through commerce.
It's the best slogan I've seen. Yeah. I think that's genius.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what some people told me. I'll leave their names out. They're from a different state. They're from Montana, but they said, like, there's no way that just providing dollar amount value can save a species or can enhance a species. And I don't believe that, because like you said, there's a handful of people out here who can throw a couple $100,000, even tens of thousands of dollars at raising, say, like Arabian oryx. And it's like, you still have to have permits to hunt those here, but like they're on the endangered list. And so if you couldn't breed those and sell those for anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 and turn a profit, why would you breed them?
Yeah.
Because they'd eat you at a house and home.
Yeah. You can't afford to.
Right.
Some people can, like you said, but it's a select few. You minimize the base for it.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. So, but it goes past money. Obviously, I mean, passion and conservation is the main key to all of this. But money, unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, depending on how you view it, it plays a big role in it. It just does. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, we've considered making a video just as like a passion project, but saying something like from the perspective of the animal, and it's like telling a story, and it's like, I can't tell you, but thank you for raising me. Thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you for keeping us warm. And it's like just a bunch of clips of fawns and calves and all that.
Yeah.
But essentially that's what I think, like you said, fortunately or unfortunately, I think to them, they're like, yeah, fortunately someone chose to, it's kind of like adoption. It's like, thank you for choosing me and my parents and my lineage to be able to raise me, because without that, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, some people might not like that part, but it's, whether it's more so of what you're keeping out than you're keeping in, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so whether it's genetics or people or whatever, but yeah, without that aspect, I mean, just imagine who wouldn't be out there. Like some of these deer, that one over there was native and, like good 160, 170, but like being able to have deer like that just growing out in the pasture is almost unheard of as far as people being able to just naturally come across.
Yeah, good stuff.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And then I guess what was, for you, what does a perfect client look like? Because you do more than just fishery. Obviously, we've been talking about whitetail, axis, you breed fish, you do consulting, you help build facilities. So like, what does a perfect client look like for Blessed Bayou?
I don't know that I've ever thought about that. I think that for me, like with the stage that we're at, the most desirable clients for me are really challenging projects. For example, like the fishery that we're working on with the Tata, it's going to be the pinnacle for me, and they've allowed that, exactly what we suggested to a T. Let's do it.
Right.
And I don't know, for me, it doesn't get much better than that. The pressure's on to produce, but we've got pretty much exactly how we want to propose it. We're going to be able to do, and that's as good as it gets, man.
Are you able to, because like I've driven by it now, and so I was going to try to take my drone out and get some pictures of it, but last time we were there is when like the really crappy weather was hitting.
Yeah.
And it's like I couldn't see 20 feet in front of us as we were leaving. But are you able to talk about details of that project, or like kind of like either how big it's going to be or what you're implementing into that?
Yeah, I think we can cut it.
If not, we'll cut back.
We'll check with them, but I'm fine with it, you know. So, but yeah, it's roughly 6 acres, but it has a tremendous amount of depth, and they're at the stage right now where they're putting the liner in, because it's, in Valley Mills, there's that country tends to not hold water real well, And so I guess one of the really cool tools that we're implementing is a new aeration system that's, it's not necessarily new technology, but it's just now catching a little bit of momentum. And so in Texas, when you're trying to grow largemouth bass, there's a certain water temp range that they grow the most in. And so you have growing seasons, right? When you have that season of really, on a Florida bass, it's probably 72 or 75 degrees to about 82 degree water temp is when they're going to grow the most. And so it's always been a challenge during the heat of the summer to maintain decent water temps where they're not stressed. And so what most people use is a diffused aeration system. So you have water, and in the summer when it gets real hot, water over 7 foot of depth, there's usually a layer called a thermocline, and your top layer doesn't. That layer, it's a cool. Like if you ever swam in a pond in the middle of summer and you bent your feet, it's like tremendous. It's quite a bit cooler than it is in the surface, right? And that's the thermocline, and so your water above the thermocline and your water below the thermocline don't mix. And is it's really, really warm, right? And so that bottom layer depletes of oxygen, and you can get a buildup of anaerobic bacteria, and some of their byproduct would be like sulfur, byproduct. And so so you end up with a kind of a toxic layer of water that doesn't have oxygen, right? And if that's where you hear ponds turning over, if it ever flips, then you take this toxic layer that has no oxygen and it flips and it rolls to the top, and there's not enough oxygen to support everything.
Right.
Or you have toxic gases in there, right? And so it kills everything.
Really?
So to prevent that, we have diffused aeration systems where it's a compressor on the bank and it pumps atmospheric air through a sinkable tube down to a diffuser that makes micro bubbles, and it rolls through the water column and it mixes it.
Is that yellow thing that you had in when we were out there, or is it different?
No, that's a surface aerator. Yeah. That's a paddle wheel. That's kind of the most efficient, but for shallower water, like in the fish ponds. But with the diffused aeration, it's great, but during the heat of summer, it can warm up all the water columns too much. And so it's always been a challenge to try to manage to where you don't cause oxygen issues or toxic gas issues, but still aerate the whole, entire water body.
Gotcha.
And so there's a new, or, not necessarily, like I said, it's kind of just now getting momentum, but it basically,
new to me.
Yeah. It'd be the first one I've ever been a part of. It's called an OST aeration system. And so it takes atmospheric air and it strips it to a high percentage of pure oxygen, and it pumps it down to a pressure chamber where it takes the water and that pure oxygen, mixes it, and then it disperses it. And you can oxygenate that lower water column without mixing it. And so you have this cooler water column throughout the warm season.
Wow.
And so in my mind, that fixes that heat issue. And I feel like we're going to be able to have a year-round growing season.
Wow.
Or at least an extended growing season.
Right.
And a much more healthier base column. And there's other things that go into that too, like, microbes on the base and processing biomaterial and all that. It promotes all that, right? And so, and not only that, we're going to see, but it might be a scenario where we could summer rainbow trout. And rainbow trout, to my knowledge, are probably the most nutritious forage fish for largemouth bass. So what I'm saying, so a normal fish, if a largemouth bass eats 10 pounds of natural forage, other fish, they say they'll gain 1 pound of body weight, right? So it takes a tremendous amount of forage, obviously.
Right.
I believe the rainbow trout, that conversion rate's much more efficient, right?
Wow.
And so like you look in California where, they've caught, I think the world record bass is 25 pounds out there and 22-pound fish. And those fish, they introduced Florida genetics over there, but they're eating rainbow trout.
Right.
And so, I think, I don't know, we'll see. We're going to, monitor the water temps and see if we could actually summer rainbow trout to where it's an available forage for the full year. And so that's kind of some of the cutting edge stuff. Now we've also designed, a tremendous amount of artificial habitat that doesn't decompose.
Right.
And so that's cover in a bass pond is really, really important, structure and cover. And so providing safe havens for your forage population and providing staging areas for largemouth bass is incredibly important. A largemouth bass is like similar to a whitetail deer. They're an edge species. They don't like to be out in the wide open most of the time.
Right.
They want to sit beside something and ambush whatever's coming by and just sit in the recliner and get fat, right? But if you don't give them that ability, if you don't have enough cover and enough staging areas, then you're going to force them to travel a lot and burn a lot of calories eating and feeding, and it's harder to put weight on them. And so, we've put in a full design on cover to where we're trying to make sure we have enough cover for forage fish to have safe havens to grow, hit sexual maturity, reproduce, provide for the system, and provide all depths of cover for your largemouth bass population where they can stage throughout the different times of day and year and sit in ambush, and so, and beyond that, water quality. And so we've kind of tried to lay it out to the,
top of the top.
Yep.
So like on that, how long in a normal situation would you say like if you release just a fingerling bass, or that might be the wrong words, I'm super green on the fish, but like,
that's good.
If you're releasing like a newborn bass, how long would it take for that female to get to 10 pounds?
We'll see. Like in my personal lake that you came and filmed, see, we stocked those bass. They're, out of our genetics, they were 2 inches in July of 2023. And we shocked them this past November, and they were between 3 and 4 pounds. And I had some water quality issues early in it. We were dealing with a drought. And so I'm really going to push them this year. All of that's remedied. I think so. If you can put 3 pounds a year on something, on a largemouth bass, you're doing really, really good, I think.
That's incredible.
And I don't know what the mark is. We're going to push it and see.
Right.
I'm hoping we can get way past that.
Right.
But genetics again, that and understanding maternal lines, and I'm going to implement that into my fisheries. I've already implemented that into my fishery breeding.
So help me understand what I know that Florida bass is like the pinnacle from my understanding of talking to you through the years, but like what genetic traits are you looking for in a fish? Like whitetail, it's very visible to see like antler width, tine length, whatever else. But like when you're talking about a bass, besides, being a fat girl, I'm not sure what other traits there are to look for.
Yeah, for fast growth rates, and you can even take like a fingerling class, like your fry, and when they advance into fingerlings, you'll have a certain percentage that just are much more aggressive and they grow much faster. And most people call them jumpers. There's a theory that those might be your most aggressive, fastest growing fish. And so that's been one of our selective traits. But as they mature, we look at how fast they grow within that age class. We look at where they break past the dorsal fin, where they break past the anal fin, and like a composition of a fish. Really? We're trying to build a NFL linebacker, right? And so we want big shoulders and really fast growth rates, and so they're going to be, when you're selecting for trophy management, obviously pure Floridas are where we focus, and beyond that, it's different lines of them, but it's selecting for those traits.
And so when you say the pure Florida, I assume are there people that have like what I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but like how you referred to like Robert Williams line. Are there people who are going to be like the Blessed Bayou line, or is there other people's names that are like have prominent names in the industry? Yeah,
they're not just extremely prominent. There's that's what I would want is mine's going to eventually be the Blessed Bayou line, or is the Blessed Bayou line. There's some really advanced groups. There's a handful that have been breeding that way too, and there's some different lines of pure Floridas that are really great genetics.
Because on those, I guess also, how are you breeding? Because there's no AI in bass, unless there is, and I don't know it.
No, yeah.
But I guess, is it just like you just say, like, here's this from these people I bought, and then we get these males and we just put them in a vat together, or how does that work?
Yeah, so originally, the best genetics in the state of Texas, in my opinion, or Camelot Bell, he had the best production, in my opinion. We've used those genetics for years, and most of our best production come out of that line. And that's Mike Frazier out of Coolidge, Texas. He's, there's probably not another lake in the state of Texas produced more 14-pound plus bass.
Wow.
And so I've worked with Mike for years utilizing his genetics, and so then once we introduce them into lakes, we'll select. Over the years, we've selected out of that, the reproduction that comes out of all of what we stocked, what we believe are the best fish is our brood fish. And then every year I breed, I hold back like the top 1% of fingerlings growth rates. And I use, once they mature, once they get to a sexual maturity, right, if they meet what I like to see, then they get implemented.
That's really cool. And so like when we've gone out and filmed, when you're shocking and doing them, I know you're shocking or I guess let's not assume anyone knows, because I didn't know before we went.
Right.
Can you kind of tell everyone what shocking is and the benefits and what all you can get from that?
Yeah. So usually when we get a phone call about somebody that wants to manage their fishery, the first thing we got to know, just like a ranch, is what's in there, right? And so that's where we bring in the electrofishing boat, and what it does is it's a boat with some booms that drop metal leads into the water, and it's hooked to a system where we can control the amperage, the voltage, and the pulse, and all these different parameters, and it temporarily stuns the fish, and it gives us the ability to net fish that are in the lake and assess the current population of the lake, forage fish, bass, everything, because all that has a tail.
Right.
It's like looking at browse lines or browse surveys for whitetail. If you look at what they eat, it's going to tell you where your population is.
Right.
No matter what the animal is. And so, especially with fish, it's hard to say, hey, you got this many bass in the lake, but I can say, hey, there's 90% of your bass are between 12 and 14 inches, and 90% of your bluegill, which are the primary forage for largemouth bass because they reproduce at higher rates than the other sunfish, they're over 6 inches. So it's telling me we have too many little bass. There's no food for them. The only bluegill that survive are the ones that are too big to eat.
Right.
And when they reproduce, it all gets eaten up. And so you have and that's majority of the fisheries that we see, they naturally overpopulate. Bass do, and they eat themselves out of house and home.
Right.
And so, you have a group of fish that are stunted at 12 to 14 inches because they just don't have the forage base to grow bigger.
Right.
And
so when you take those out, because I know like when we were going, you would scoop them in and it was like the left side's one thing, the right side's one. Is that like a keep and discard, or do you replace them? What do you do with those fish?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the management goals. If a guy wants a really high catch rate, well, then that's not a bad scenario. You try to rebuild a forage base and have a really high population of bass. If a guy's looking to produce quality fish where you're consistently catching 3 to 5 pound bass and have an opportunity to catch a 10-pound bass, well, then we're going to go in. We'll probably genetic test those fish. There's a group out of Georgia called Red Hills Fisheries, and they have a breeding a bass line called the Titan Bass. It's very advanced, really good group of guys. You can send in DNA to those guys, and they'll tell you the relatedness and a probability of trophy. I mean, they've got it really, genetically, they're very far advanced. And so we may do an analysis that way too, and just see if you have a bunch of old fish that are stunted, then we may suggest killing the whole pond out. Sometimes that's a much better scenario. I can go in there and rebuild the forage and grow bass in a year that I'd never get these two and waste a ton of money dumping food on them, and managing the water quality and all these other things that we have to manage.
Absolutely.
So it all depends on what the goals are.
Right. So. Well, what's the biggest one you've ever shocked up or someone's caught that you started that you're like, man, I know this is something that we produce for a client? Do you know that?
Yeah. I think 14.3 is the biggest that I've shocked up. Yeah.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Man, one of the things that I like to ask is like, what's the biggest misconception in your business? And let's do that from the fishery side and the wildlife side.
Yeah. The fishery side is really hard to get people to understand that it takes year-round management. Deer management, it's a little different. People, it's more, I don't know if it's more publicly known or advertised or what, but they know, you're going to be managing year-round. Well, with fish, it's just the same, even tougher.
Right.
But a lot of people...
I wonder if it's just because they can see them. Like you said, it's underwater.
Yeah, and I think it's just a kind of a, recreational fishing management really hadn't been there that long. I mean, I think in the 80s it kind of started turning that way, and in the 90s it picked up, and so it's still fairly new in that aspect. And so I think just the kind of old school mentality is you throw a bunch of fish in a pond and hey, they're good, and it's by no means that way. It's
like when guys say like, oh, I'll just buy one 180-inch stalker buck and throw it out on my native property, and it's like, work. You will never produce anything.
That's right. Yeah, or even if you took the 10 best does in the state of Texas and just threw them on a piece of property, and you didn't manage nutrition, and you didn't manage sex ratios, and you didn't manage predators, and you didn't manage everything. You're not going to come back 5 years later and there's going to be 22 220-inch typical bucks walking up to your feeder. You know, you got to manage every step, nutrition, you know, all those things, habitat,
absolutely,
predator control, all that. So,
absolutely. Yeah. So, I guess let's kind of pivot to what's been happening lately as far as whitetail breeders. I know that's kind of a sore subject right now for most, or it depends on what side of the coin you're on. But can you kind of walk through, because I genuinely don't know, I haven't had time to read up on it, of what was just passed for Texas, I guess, Texas breeders, as well as why are some people liking it and why are some people having hesitations with it?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a touchy subject. It's tough, man. The whitetail breeding world in the state of Texas it's tough. It just is. And as we touched on earlier, the importance of it is tremendous in my mind. And we have to figure out a way to not kill it.
Right.
You know, and that's, I feel like, you know, all conservation efforts, you know, need to understand that. But when it comes down to regulations on the whitetail breeding facilities, it's been tough for many, many years, and it's continually got tougher, right? As we have had to pick up our testing requirements, you know, there's been more positives pop. And I don't think I think that's to be expected. You know, as you and I talked earlier, I mean, the CWD supposedly started in Colorado. It's in New Mexico. It's in Texas. It's in Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky. I mean, it's not unreasonable to think that the disease is probably across the state of Texas, in my opinion. I mean, when you look at it from a 1,000 feet view, if it's spread all over there, it's probably here.
Geographically, it's probably everywhere. It's just if you're looking for it or not. Yeah,
that's right. If you're gonna test at a high percentage or a high rate, I think you're going to probably find it.
Right.
So with that said, we're going to have to learn to live with it. The spread is inevitable, and the spread's probably here. If I heard Dr. Seabury correctly, when he tested the native whitetail population in Texas, 75% had an S marker. Can you believe that?
Wow.
And to me, I mean, just, you know, I'm not a geneticist, but just common sense looking at that, if we know S's are at the 96 codon are the most resistant marker, right? If 75% of the free-ranging herd have an S marker, then to me, that disease has probably been around for many, many years. It's been, natural selection.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's quite a bit of evidence to me that it is probably everywhere, just if you're going to test. And the breeders, you know, the last statistics I looked at, you had, you know, like over 40,000 tests from whitetail breeding operations in the state of Texas, and there was probably around 70,000 deer in pens. And Texas Parks and Wildlife tested, just under 17,000 deer for CWD, and there was an estimated population of 5 to 6 million deer in the state of Texas. And so when you look at those differences, in the monitoring, you're going to see it more over here, because we're testing for it more and we're monitoring at a higher level. And I think it's safe to say that the whitetail breeding industry monitors. They're the most proactive group exponentially in monitoring for the diseise. But all that comes with a cost, right? Because it's incredibly risky. You pop a positive, I've been dealing with it with Thompson, and 99% of my deer I'm partnered with Gene on there at his place, and I don't, my hat's off to the guys that stay in after that, but it is, there's not much incentive to stay in. I mean, you're at that point, if you pop a positive, depopulation is high up on the list, and so that's incredibly unfortunate, in my mind, because the disease, it has so many ways of moving, right? Ag products, natural movement of deer. I mean, there was a deer recorded in Mississippi that traveled over 100 miles, carcasses, I think, were probably a huge factor for years. Now, Texas Parks and Wildlife has done a really good job of trying to remedy that with the new carcass restrictions, but you had, in Texas, 600 to 700,000 animals harvested annually, whitetail deer harvested annually for several years.
Right.
And majority of those carcasses get moved, and a lot of them all over the state. I mean, there's so many ways it moves. Scavengers, birds. I mean, it just has the ability to move, hence all the states that have positives, right? So when you look at the breeding.
And is it an assumption of that's how it's traveled? Because I know, like I said, I've been out for a while, so I haven't been keeping up.
Right.
But I know at one point it was the best educated guess of how it was traveling. Is there anything that's like definitive?
No, I don't think. Not that I know of. I mean, it's all. I think
speculation.
It's all. That's right. Yeah, it's hypothetical. I mean, I'm sure there's some science behind, exactly how it moves, and I think, a lot of the state agencies, believe, deer to deer is probably one of the more effective ways that it's transmitted.
Right.
But I think, with Texas and all the areas that had sheep and goats for years and scrapies, and that's probably why Texas has so many S markers. I mean, it's as far as I understand, it's been proven scientifically that, scrapies can jump from sheep to whitetail. Right. And then when it transfers from that infected whitetail to another infected whitetail, it even changes, is the way I understand it. And so, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that species cross contamination is possible, and so I think all of that plays into it. But you look, all right, so this disease moves so many different ways, right? And it's probably already spread just by looking at where all it has been detected and the volumes of testing, right? You have breeders that, they release somewhere around 20,000 animals a year on the high fence properties only. And every animal that moves has been tested, live antemortem tested. It's not perfect. It's not. But it sure is more proactive than any other way that's monitored how that disease moves, right? It's incredibly more proactive. And then you take in the testing volume within the facility over several years. It's astronomical. It's astronomical. And so in my mind, although it's not perfect, it's still probably the safest avenue of moving animals, right? Like the whitetail breeding industry, because it's tested so harshly. So you're taking 20,000 animals or whatever the number is, releasing them on high fence properties only, and every animal that you moved had an antemortem test within 8 months. And then you look at, 700,000 carcasses moving around the state for 10 years or 20, however long that many animals have been harvested. It's a minuscule sector of how the disease moves, in my opinion. And now as we get into genetic resistance, that, Dr. Seabury kind of laid out an algorithm that you can test DNA and say, hey, this deer scores this, and we're going to breed for resistance for CWD. That's invaluable to me. So with all that said, the regulations, with all that testing, the breeders, our positive rate goes up. And it's kind of skewed in my mind, because you have how this disease, is monitored, and it's almost inevitable that it's going to be around the state, know, and probably build. And so it's just risky. And the more you test, the more you're going to find, know. And so it's a tough process. And I feel for the state agencies too. It's they have to manage all this too. And there's all different interested groups or invested groups into this. And so they have to be able to try to walk that line. And it's not easy, man. And the current regulations, we just had obviously quite a bit more implemented, and or voted on and approved by the commission. And the commission's another thing. I mean, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, 9 members, some incredibly intelligent, achieved human beings, right? I'm sure they bring great things to that commission, but there's 0 biologists. There's 9 commissioners and 0 biologists. And the commission governs Texas Parks and Wildlife, whose sole purpose is to manage the wildlife and fisheries in the state of Texas.
Isn't that insane?
That's crazy to me. When I just, recently did the real estate schooling, and their commission, in that school they teach you, their commission, there's 9 members, 6 must be active brokers. 6 of them. And I think that would be great for our commission, for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, to have 6 of the most intelligent biologists in the state of Texas.
Right.
And have 3, people like Jeff Hildebrand that's incredibly intelligent, incredibly accomplished, and Oliver Bell and those guys that, they bring a lot to the table as well.
Right.
I'm not knocking the commissioners themselves,
right.
But they're appointed by the governor, and for some reason, we don't have any biologists on the commission.
It just doesn't logically make sense why you would. And then they have where you can vote, but this past one was 80%, 86% against, completely against, and they still voted with it. But again, that's where I think logically, and I go, well, what was your reasoning behind if there's not a biologist on there that can stand up and give a reason as to, besides we didn't want to?
Yeah, where's the science? Yeah, I think those commissioners, with this rule package, of course, TDA had Jody, and Kevin Davis had they were pretty active within it. And
right.
I think the chairman of the commission said, hey, TWA and TDA need to sit down and try to figure out something that they both can agree to.
Right.
That's tough, man. It's tough. I wouldn't want to have been in Jody or Kevin's shoes.
Right.
And I think that rule package started out much tougher than what most people realize.
Right.
And they fought and spent, a tremendous amount of time. It was like a full-time job. It still is to them,
Right.
And it's an unpaid, it's kind of a lose-lose situation, because you have the whitetail breeders that, I get it, get upset real easy. But I think it's just lack of understanding everything that's going on in some aspects.
Right. Because is what was originally proposed open public record?
I don't know. There's some things that I've been told that were on it, 100% of hunter harvest for all release sites. I was told was on it. That'd be terrible.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because you received deer. It's crazy. So you go into these rules, and the proximity rule is so they got away from CWD zones.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's a great thing. It freed up a tremendous amount of acreage. Right. But they implemented a proximity rule for the breeder, basically. And I can't understand it scientifically. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's good. But one thing it is better than what the current rule was, or the previous rule was, because if there was a detection that close to you in the previous rule, you were shut down basically. Right. Or you had to do business within that zone. Right now, you do have an avenue out, but you have to be double fence. You have to.
I was going to say, isn't the limited I've had time to talk to people about it, doesn't that really only benefit the new breeder getting in?
Well, it depends.
I guess unless you want to spend a couple $100,000 to double fence. But if you have millions of dollars of deer, but if you only have 20, 30 deer, I would say an average deer breeder has, then it doesn't really help you much.
Yeah. If high fence is, I don't know. You're right. It's absolutely added expense. For the smaller breeders, it's not as much. You can also, however your plat's laid out, you could probably, some of the facilities can just take some pins off of their plat and create a double fence scenario if you have to. But ultimately, unfortunately, you're going to need to be double fence. And I think that if you're breeding a new facility, you absolutely do it, But even my access pins are that way. I like it. I like to be able to have an alley all the way around anyways, and I want 2 barriers before they can get into my pen. Right. But I understand, man, it kills people. Yeah. It does. And you're already pinched incredibly hard. Right. And the whitetail breeding industry can't handle much more. They just can't. It'll shut it down. And that's unfortunate, because it's the only viable solution to CWD. Right. And so it is really tough. But you look at these rules, so they're terrible, but they're still an improvement. And some of them are, right? You have the ability to go from a 5-year trace period to a 3-year trace period. That's huge. Right. And you now have a rule where you can these trace through animals that get a lot of people hung up, they can free that up too. And so that, to me, I see it as progress.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is, and a lot of people probably won't agree with me, but I believe that right now we have more influence over what regulations are coming our way than we've ever had in the industry. I truly believe that. I really do. I think that that the chairman and the commission and the staff look at the industry at a better light than they have in the past. And I think that there's been respect gained there. And I think that they truly reach out for input. Now, you're not, it's most of it's unfair. It really is. And it's not great, but I do see it as progress. And I look at it as a marathon. Like you know, you have to continually focus on that progress and try to find a even ground where everybody can work together. And, you know, and the truth of the matter is the breeders have hurt themselves too.
Right.
They
seem like they're not on the same team.
Yeah. You self-implode when you need unity, and the whole wildlife ranching community needs unity, in my opinion.
Right.
And I'd love to see that. I really would. But even in the past, you know, doing things, you know, there's been things that the breeders have done that have caused these,
right.
You know, there's bad apples in every group. Right. But so I can see some sides of this. Right. And, you know, I hate when it's divisive, but as long as I've been in the whitetail breeding industry in the state of Texas, it's a tough group. It is. Right. They seem to self-implode. Yeah. And I don't know why, you know, but it's that way. You go to like I call auctions all over the nation, right? You go to the top 30 north in Shipshewana, Indiana, and it's primarily Amish breeders. It's completely different than the Texas shows. Yeah. It's my favorite show to go to. I love it. And you have these breeders that, I mean, they're passionate about it. The Amish guys, and they're serious. It's not a hobby, you know, or a wealthy man's hobby. It's the real deal. Yeah. But it's very refreshing to me. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's a great group, and they stick together pretty good. Right. You'll see. I mean, they're very integrable people, truly trying to produce, you know, improved genetics, which obviously, you know, what we touched on earlier, that's my passion. Absolutely. You know, being able to utilize genetics to improve properties for generations. I mean, that's incredibly important. Yeah. But like I said, I mean, the whitetail breeding industry in the state of Texas, it can't handle much more. I mean, I don't think that's my opinion, you know, and all of that's my opinion. I'm not saying I'm completely right, or that's just how I feel. Right. And I would love to see everybody come together, and I don't, you know, some people get mad that, you know, Texas organizations sat down with TWA, but I think that's great. Right. That's tremendous progress in my mind. Yeah. That's great. And it's a lot of those guys. There's a lot of Texas Parks and Wildlife guys I love, man. I have a ton of friends that are biologists in the state of Texas with the department that I think very highly of. And the new wildlife director, Alan Kane, I think he's a great guy. I just had a meeting yesterday with one of my customers that hit a positive on a ranch, and it was with Dr. Reed, Hunter Reed, you know, and honestly, it was a good meeting. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Right. And Dr. Reed was pretty cordial. I mean, he did a good job. So, right. I don't have this outlook like it's all bad. Like, you know, right. I do think there's a tremendous amount of unfairness, and I think it's a marathon to fix that. But I don't see it as all bad. And I especially think coming together and sharing minds letting, educating people on what it is and why it is so important, I think is important. Yeah, we're, because that's what I feel like it's always been, whether it's good, bad, true, or false, or whatever it would be. But I feel like there's just a stigma with every organization, right? And I feel like it's TDA's high fence, EWA's exotic high fence, TWA's anti-high fence. Yeah. And we're actually going to do, Droptine's going to be at TWA this year. That's great. And like, I think between all the services we offer, we can reach so many more people. But at the same time, like, I've already talked to the guy that's taking over TJ, and he's in New Braunfels, and I told him, I was like, we need to go to lunch soon,
just because I want to kind of start bridging that gap.
Yeah.
Like if we can start there and maybe we bring some of our clients to the show and we can start having that conversation.
Yep.
Don't get me wrong. It's just kind of like, would TDA and DBC ever merge? Hell no, because there's just certain people that would have to die out to let that happen.
Yeah.
And I think that will be the same aspect of, high fence and low fence people. There's always going to be your diehard low fence people.
Yep.
But I think the common thing we all have to come to is we are all landowners. We are all believe in conservation, no matter what your definition of it is, we all want less government overreach.
Yeah.
And if we can all just have that base and come as one voice, even if we have different opinions, I think that's going to really start to bring people together to start the conversation for, like you said, generationally.
Yeah.
And just being able to come together and have one voice fighting against someone versus 5 or 6 different voices screaming, I think would speak volumes when we go to Austin and other places.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I really felt that was a huge missed opportunity for DBC and TDA not to figure it out. And I was in on the conversations, I sit on the board TDA and, to me, because I love DBC too, boy. And those board members are like family to me. A lot of them and a lot of the members and on both sides.
Right.
And they bring a lot of value, but just what that would have represented in my mind and shown the memberships of both would have been powerful.
Right.
I thought that was a huge opportunity missed.
Right.
But like I said, the Texas deer breeders, man, there's always something. And so I don't know if you can. Yeah, I don't know. I think eventually we have to figure it out.
Right.
Or it's out.
Well, and that's what I've always heard and seen. There's sometimes you just can't deny it as far as the clicks or whatever else. But man, there's even some people that I thought were man, they're above that. They wouldn't be near it. And it's just the more you dig in deep, it's is it money? I don't think it's status in this group, but I just don't know what it is. But I know I've heard of deer being bought out that were canceled from it. And they're just well, don't buy from him and don't do that. But it's just guys, just be Switzerland, be neutral. Let's just all work together and breed. And whether it's for genetics or traits or whatever it may be, but let's just set our pride to the side.
Yeah.
And do what's best for the industry.
Yeah. That's why I'm so refreshing up at the Top 30 North. The Amish guys are that way. They don't, and they're incredibly honest.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many lots I was fixing to announce that they would come up and tell me, hey, I saw the backup buck chasing that doe. She didn't take the AI. Mm-hmm. And it just wanted people to know. And then they'd throw something extra in there, straw semen or something. But I think that's so cool, just integrity to the bone. And Texas, like I said, there's a lot of money in that industry. And, I don't know if it's greed and pride and, which are normal human behaviors that can take over and usually they destroy.
Right.
I think if you focus on the species first, then you're not going to go wrong.
Right.
But what I consider, a very well-bred animal, a lot of people may not, but it's, like I said, those traits earlier that, it's not just antler traits, survivability and, a lot of things,
Absolutely. So what would be your opinion on where, I guess the status of the organizations or what, I know you're, like you said earlier, it's just your opinion, but what do you think would be best for whitetail and exotic, I guess? Again, we're all under the same umbrella. What would be your opinion that would be best to move forward to better land ownership and everything we're in?
Yeah, I think that as a whole, I look at it as wildlife ranching as a whole and everything that goes into it. And I think that all of that under one umbrella is great. Now, whether that means not necessarily one organization, but, I think it would be great to set subcommittees up that somewhat bind.
Right.
Right. Like if you took EWA and TDA, for example, and you set up a few guys from TDA and a few guys from EWA, and they met every month.
Right.
And everybody at least discuss, are there any issues? If there are, let's handle them. Let's work together and inform each other what going on each side and really put our heads together. I think that's great.
Right.
But it goes beyond that too. I mean, it's all the way down to fences and equipment and everything that goes into ranching. You know, it's more than just animals and breeding.
Right.
I think all that sector would be best representing themselves, you know?
Right.
And a common goal, whatever that common goal is. For the, like I said, you put the species first.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Then I guess kind of how we've been on the theme of generationally and looking to the future and everything, I guess what's your opinion? Where do you think either the organizations will be? And because I feel like those have changed drastically of like even what puts into the lots that are for sale. Yeah. But like, where do you see the organizations in 10, 15 years? And then where do you see whitetail breeding and exotic breeding in 10 to 15 years? Yeah,
it's tough to say. I think that, I think it's a foot race on the whitetail breeding end is, you know, building up a herd with enough genetic resistance before you get put out of business. That's how I feel. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's truth. And so, you know, some people are going to survive and probably do extremely well. And I think that ultimately, for the whitetail breeders, the long-term solution is to, you know, not pop any positives. And the only way to do that is through genetic resistance, in my opinion, because as we discussed earlier, there's so many ways that disease moves that goes unmonitored. It's like playing Russian roulette.
Right.
And so if we can make it there, I think in 15 years, it'll be unbelievable. I think in 5 years, you'll see, you know, SS animals that are -5 something and, you know, that are just tremendously resistant. And I think you'll see that market open up.
Right.
The ranch stocking market is really good because the supply's way down. So many people have gotten out.
Right.
You know, and I mean, the industry's probably under half of what it used to be. And so, but the demand's still there. Absolutely. Because there's no replacing that for landowners. There's no replacement for genetic improvement. Yep. It's the real deal. And we've proved it time and time again on property. So I think if the whitetail breeder can survive, I think it'll be a great industry.
Absolutely.
And like I said, even right now, the ranch stocking industry is really good. And I think things are going to get better regulation-wise. I really do. At the end of that last commission meeting, the chairman told the director, Texas Parks and Wildlife, that the herd plans really need to be simplified. That's huge too, man. That's a big deal. If 5 years ago, you would have never heard that from a commission. Right. Ever. My hat's off to Jeff Hildebrand. That's great. I think that's awesome. But those things, I really believe there's headway being made there. I really do.
Right.
And so, you know, it's just a matter of
can you survive it?
Yeah, because you can make yourself, you know, the market's there.
Right.
It's just surviving.
Right.
And so in the exotic industry, I mean, you guys have a better pulse on that than I do, other than me breeding Axis, but I love it too. I think that's great, you know, and I think the EWA has just knocked it out of the park, man. They, from sitting back and watching, they've been really, really good at forming that organization and putting conservation first. And I think a lot of them, you know, and so, you know, that market, it's just as important, I think, to the ranching industry. I hear, like the meeting I was in yesterday, that landowner, you know, they do a bunch of customer entertainment there, or a lot of customer entertainment there. And he was like, man, if this herd plan is going to be that rough, we'll harvest every whitetail on this ranch. Because to be honest, a lot of my customers, you know, they're almost over shooting whitetail, you know, or hunting whitetail. Where they really are enjoying the Axis and fallow and oryx and addax and all these other species. We're beginning to see that they're almost more popular, which is crazy to think about. But that's why I love, you know, with Axis, to me, they're one of the most beautiful animals in the state of Texas. And a giant Axis buck is just as pretty as it gets to me. Right. And so I think it's cool, but I think both industries, if the whitetail industry can survive, if the whitetail industry does not survive, then like I said, the wildlife ranching industry is going to suffer tremendously. I truly believe that. And the exotic industry will too.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I talked to Nash a while back, a couple of days ago probably, but I would be curious to see what the statistics are, just because Texas is so hot. You can hunt exotics year round, but I'd be willing to bet anywhere from 60 to 75% of exotics are harvested during whitetail season.
Yeah.
And given that fact, I think they're kind of go hand in hand. And so I don't think it can be, I like how you said the wildlife conservation as a whole rather than like whitetail and exotic industry, because I would argue that they're almost synonymous, like they go together. And
wildlife ranching,
being able to have that, and I think again trying to get them together, it would be huge. But I think a lot of people are just going to have to, I guess, just be told they have to put their pride to a side and say, hey, do what's best for the industry. Put industry first.
Yeah. That's the mindset. I also think, to touch on, you're talking about, most of your exotics are harvested during whitetail season, and the whitetail that is one species somebody will harvest every year. Right. And so it is, for the hunting industry, it's huge. And so, and the wildlife ranching industry is huge. I do think it brings a cool aspect, like your summer bucks on axis and other species that are still huntable throughout the spring before it gets really, really hot. And especially on these commercial hunting operations that have phenomenal fisheries, I think there's a huge opportunity to extend your season and income tremendously, where a guy can go and catch trophy fish and harvest a trophy exotic, whatever species it would be that would, work there in that time of year. Right. But it, like you said, it's synonymous, but it also helps when you're playing both, or when both are a part of your business plan or your management plan.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause I mean, like you said, everyone has to set what their expectation or what their goal is, right? Because if it's just a place that's a hobby, but you still have to keep your clients happy, whether if they're paying or not. But like having that and making sure just everyone is successful is going to be tremendous to this industry.
Yeah.
And so
I agree.
But yeah, I guess, overall, I mean, the only other thing I can think of right now is there's some works on your end of, there's about to be the realtor of Blessed Bayou Realty, or I don't know what you call it, but if you want to kind of announce it to everyone and what you're working on and why you would be ideal to be someone's realtor.
So recently, last year, ended up being, with managing these properties, you end up, when they want to sell, you end up knowing as much or more about the property than the owner or anybody that's been involved with it. And so usually I get involved explaining the genetics or everything about it, how we laid out the habitat, everything. And so, last year and over the years, when just being a part of these ranch sales, I decided to go ahead and get my real estate license for that reason, and I felt like as a wildlife and fisheries biologist that, you'd be able to offer something very unique to somebody that's searching for a property or selling a property. Like you just, even from an equipment aspect, like if I'm going to show a property, I've got an electrofishing boat, we'll go look and see what's in that lake, or I have a high level understanding of genetics just simply from the time I put into it through doing auctions and all, and studying it for that many years. And so, and understanding habitat and all those things, I think we have, something very valuable to offer to people searching for properties or selling properties. And so for that reason, I ended up getting my real estate license and through your help, I think we'll probably launch it, sometime soon, but it'll be something, like Blessed Bayou Land and Ranch, and so I have, my broker is a very good friend of mine, named Tommy Herring. And, he's a whitetail breeder as well, has a ranch, and, I've worked with him for several years now, and we're real close friends. And so he's excited as well, and so, I think it's going to be a, kind of a holistic view of what we do,
right?
But started at the real estate level, and my end goal is to develop ranches, and so in which I'm on a project now. We're developing a ranch, and so it's kind of shifting that way, and so it's exciting for me, and our team. So it just kind of brings another aspect to the whole group of what we're doing,
right.
Wildlife and fisheries management as a whole, and so I don't know, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think it'd be great because so many times that's what I've also kind of built, like we're going to really dive into it this year and next year, but like any of the ranch real estate jobs we've done, I mean, there might be a ranch that has 200,000-300,000 minimum of animals out on the property. And it's like, man, that needs to be shown. Or like some people, I know guys who bought ranches just because they didn't even factor in the animals into the price.
Right.
And they bought it, did a couple helicopter jobs, sold the animals, and then turned around and flipped the land again.
Yeah.
And it's like, so having someone in here that knows like the true value of what you have on your property, whether it's on the land or underwater, they'll be able to tell you exactly what you can get, help you find buyers for that. And so I think that's going to be a wonderful thing for you and your family to be able to venture into.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Heck yeah.
I think it'll be great.
Well, Chris, is there anything else that you think we need to touch on?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to everyone tuning in. We'll be able to do more of these podcasts coming up soon. So thank you for watching, and make sure you go to droptinestudios.com/podcast and let us know if there's anyone you want to see on the podcast or a subject you want us to cover. So thank you, Chris. And thank you to everyone watching.
Yeah, enjoyed it.